everyone, and welcome to another Daily Dose of Drupal. Today we are on episode number 224, and we're going to be talking about how to build custom entity types with the ECK module, or the Entity Construction Kit module. So what exactly is the Entity Construction Kit module? Well, essentially it allows you to build custom entities or custom data structures to store data within your Drupal site. So you've probably built out custom content types before, and those are very useful, but there are some times where you don't want it to actually be a content type, because if you build a content type, it comes with having its own page, it has its own path, you can add comments to it. There's a lot of things that you get if you build a content type that you don't necessarily want if you just want to store data. So if you're looking to architect out your website in a different way, custom entities are a really good way to do that. And in Drupal 8, you'll realize that pretty much everything is an entity. Not everything, but pretty close. So we're going to learn about the Entity Construction Kit. We're going to build a sample entity, and you're going to realize it's pretty similar to just building out content types. So there's not too much to it. If you know how to build content types, this is going to be easy. Let's get started. So I'm on the the Entity Construction Kit module page. You can see it's called ECK, drupal.org/project/ECK. And we're going to be using the 8.x-1.0-alpha 5 version. And you can see it's built for site builders or for developers. We're just going to focus on the site builders portion today. You can actually implement and use the APIs. You could also build your own custom entities outside of ECK, which I'll probably show you in the future. But we're just going to worry about just for site builders. So if I go to the website here, just have a test Drupal website up and running, and you can see I have the module already enabled. And if I go to it, we could take a look at the permissions if we want. There's a few permissions. We can give permissions to administer ECK entities, ECK entity bundles, entity types, or access control. Most likely this is always going to be the same role that has all these things, but it gives you some flexibility if you want to get more fine-grained with the permissions. What we are going to do is we're going to click on Configure, and we're going to add an entity type. And I'm just going to create an entity called Statistic, and just to show, I'm going to check all of these. These base fields are optional. I would typically recommend having a title field, though. It's just useful to be able to classify the different types of content or the different types of data. But I'm going to check them all. We'll click Create Entity Type. And now you see we have our entity type listed here. That was very similar to just creating a content type. It's pretty simple. But now you'll see that there's bundles here. So if you think about Drupal content types, they're all considered nodes. You've probably heard of nodes, you've heard of entities. If you create a content type in Drupal, it's considered part of the node entity structure. So each content type you create is technically a bundle within this greater node entity structure. Here we have our statistic. This is kind of replacing the node article or node content entity in this example, and this is a statistic entity. We can have different types of bundles. So perhaps we want a numeric statistic. Maybe we want a more graphical statistic, so we want an image. We can have different types of statistics that we could classify all within the statistic entity structure, and we could add different bundles. I'm just going to create one called number stat. Again, we could create all different types of bundles. I can give it a description. We'll just stick with and keep it simple. Now click the save button. And then you'll realize it's just like adding fields to a content type. We have the option to manage fields, manage the form display, and actually manage the display of this number stat bundle. So I'm going to manage the fields. I'm going to create a new field and select a decimal number. I'm just going to put number just to keep it nice and simple. Save it. I could add or change the settings if I want. I'll keep them the defaults. So I don't really need to do anything here. I'll require it just to make sure it's required. Save it. And it's simple. Just adding fields. So if you're familiar with adding fields in Drupal, this will be very similar. Let's go ahead now and actually create one of these entities. So I'm going to go back to my ECK entity types, and you'll see now I can add content. I can still edit the bundle list, edit the actual entity information, or delete it, but I'm going to add some content. And you can see this brings me over to the front end of the site, but because I added that author, this author fields here, this when is it authored on is added because I checked that box next to adding the created date. And then there's a title field. So I'm going to say, I'm going to throw in some let's say I was building a company website and I wanted to have some impactful stats to show. So 700 customers. You can see it just displays number 700. It tells me the actual author of this. It tells me when it was created. I can edit it and delete it just like content. You can see it does get its own route, but typically you're not building these structures out for you to be able to access, or for users to be able to access this path directly. What you really are using this for is if you want to build it into adding views. Maybe I wanted to build a page that listed all of the customers, or all of the statistics on the site, but I didn't want those to link off to individual pages. So maybe a content type is a little bit too heavy-handed of a solution. So I could use an ECK entity type. Otherwise, you may want to build out using entity reference fields. You maybe want to be able to reference these different entities within your content, but you don't necessarily want to treat it as if it's content on your site. So that's kind of the big differentiation of when a custom entity might be useful, is when you don't really want to treat it like it's traditional content in the Drupal sense. So I'm going to say number of employees. You can see I've already tested this before. Say we have 45 employees. And now if I go back to my ECK entity types and I go and click here, I can see content list. You can see I have a list of these entities. And because it's just like entities, or just like how you create your content traditionally, you can use views and anything else you might need. So that's all there is for today. As you can see, the module is incredibly simple. It's just like using content types and building out fields. It's just, instead of using traditional content, you're using custom entities. So you can really do some very complex data modeling and set it up, your site up exactly how you want that data to be saved in your database. So that's it for this time on the Daily Dose of Drupal. Make sure you're following me on Twitter if you're not already at smthomas3. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.